There is no movement. There's no movement going on here. So this is the Harris versus Trump margin. You look where we were a month ago, it was Harris by 3. Look at where we are today. It's Harris by 3. Simply put, this race hasn't moved. It has been continuously very, very tight. And one way you can get an understanding of that is I want to take you through history, all right? Campaigns where any candidate held a lead of at least 5 or more points in the polls. We're going to go all the way back since 1964. Most campaigns, at least one candidate has led by 5 points or more at least 3 weeks. In fact, all 15 of them from 1964 to 2020. If you look this year, there have been 0 days, count them 0 days, where either Kamala Harris or Donald Trump has been ahead by at least 5 points in the polls. In fact, you could go all the way back when Joe Biden was going to be the presumptive Democratic nominee, and even back then, no candidate led by at least 5 points in the polls. The bottom line is this is a historically close race, and it's a historically consistent race, Jessica.
Let's talk about swing states. What are we seeing there?
All right, so, we talk about these national polls. The national polls really don't mean very much, right? Because it's all about those battleground states. And, of course, let's take a look at what I call the core 7 battleground states, all right? This is, again, your Harris versus Trump margin. And look at these Great Lake battleground states: Pennsylvania, Michigan, Wisconsin. Look, you see some blue on this side of the screen, right? These are a little bit more friendly to Kamala Harris than the Sun Belt that we'll get to in a second. But look at this. A 1-point advantage in Pennsylvania, 2 points in Michigan, 2 points in Wisconsin, all well within the margin of error, too close to call. You come over now to the Sun Belt battleground states, you got a little bit more red here. Trump up by a point in North Carolina, Arizona, Georgia. Nevada, Harris holding on to a 1-point advantage, but again, very, very tight. So what does this mean for the electoral map, all right? So let's take a look and say, okay, imagine if the polls match what end up being the results perfectly, right? That's probably not going to happen, but for the sake of this exercise, let's do it. What we see, of course, is Harris carrying, let's get some green font here, there we go, carrying all of these Great Lake battleground states: Wisconsin, Michigan, Pennsylvania. And then she also carries Nevada, but you see again Trump, Arizona, Georgia, North Carolina. Look at this. Kamala Harris gets to exactly 276 electoral votes, slightly more than the 270 she needs to win. Donald Trump right behind at 262. But the bottom line is, Jessica, at this hour, this race remains incredibly tight. We've done these segments over the last month. This battleground map, simply put, really hasn't changed. Maybe a slight advantage to Kamala Harris, but a race that remains way too close to call.
And you're right. It is remarkable how consistent it's been in that. I also am curious, what if the polls are off? There have been previous elections, of course, where that's happened. What if that happens?
What happens if the polls are slightly off? Remember, back in 2020, the polls underestimated Donald Trump. So what happens if we have a similar error across those key battleground states? Well, if that happens again, look at this. Donald Trump carries all of these Great Lake battleground states. He carries Nevada as well. Of course, he carries Arizona, Georgia, and North Carolina. And he gets to, get this, 312 electoral votes. So the bottom line is, if we have an error like we did 4 years ago, Donald Trump is going to win this election. Kamala Harris is going to lose. But here's the thing. Everyone always says, oh, the polls were off in 2020. They're going to be off this year. Not necessarily. Because what happens if the polls are off like they were in 2022, which, of course, was only 2 years ago, those midterm elections? Well, then we put all these Great Lake battleground states right back into Kamala Harris's column. She wins in the Southeast, in Georgia and North Carolina. She wins in Arizona, and she wins in Nevada. And then it's a Harris blowout, 319 electoral votes to Donald Trump's 219. So the bottom line is this. We are at this point right now where the race is so tight, but even though it's so tight, don't be surprised if either one of these candidates come election night and the days to follow when we're counting those votes ends up running away with this. The bottom line is this race is too close to call. It really could go either way. And the margin of error in presidential election polling, when we have races this close, are much wider than I think folks think.
Right, right. And I think you underscore such an important point, which is that it is historically close. And also, if it tips one way or the other at the end, it could look like a blowout in the Electoral College for one of these candidates, which is kind of a fascinating dynamic kind of built into all of this, Harry.
I know. Our founders, who knew?
Who knew? I guess they thought they did. Harry Enten, thanks so much for that.
Thank you.
Appreciate it. Let's turn now to our panel. Joining me now, Democratic strategist and former senior advisor for the Bernie Sanders presidential campaign, Chuck Rocha, and also with us, Republican strategist Katie Frost. Thanks to both of you for being here with us. You just heard Harry there. This is a very tight race. It could go really either way. Trump does appear to hold that advantage in some of the Sun Belt states. Tonight, we've seen some star power for Harris in Arizona with actors like Kerry Washington and Jessica Alba, Glenn Close, holding a block party to rally black voters in Phoenix. Chuck, I just want to start with you. It seems like we are reaching the point in these campaigns, and 30 days out, it makes sense, where the surrogates are out. So last night we saw Elon Musk with Trump in Pennsylvania. We're seeing some of these actors out in Arizona. This is where we are in this race. It's now time to get out the vote.
You're so right, Jessica. And I was watching you and Harry were exactly right there on that last point, particularly, which is about the momentum at the very end. What's happened, I'm one of the very few people who's actually run one of these presidential campaigns. And at the end, it's all about that little bit of vote, not that's undecided, but that you need to turn out. That's where we are today. They've spent a year going out and identifying Democrats and Republicans who are going to vote for them or for the other candidate in Pennsylvania, for example. And now they've got to go get those that were in the middle that they have to ID and then persuade to turn out. So you see surrogates, you see star powers, you see all kinds of stuff going on about getting out the vote. GOTV in our world. And Harry was exactly right. In these battleground states, it's going to be every vote that will count. And it will probably come down to folks that have newly registered who weren't even eligible to vote in the last election because they were too young, because pollsters aren't talking to them, because they don't have a voter history, so they're not a likely voter. And I think that's how tight this election will be.
Yeah, that's a very, very good point. And Katie, you know, you go state by state, and again, both parties, both campaigns trying to reach these voters that maybe didn't vote before, are young and weren't able to, whatever the case may be. I know Republicans are really proud of what they've been doing in Pennsylvania, et cetera, et cetera. How do you see the GOTV kind of landscape for the Trump campaign when it comes to these battleground states?
Well, I live in one of those battleground states. I'm a native of Georgia. I was actually in a Trump Force 47 office just yesterday. I was talking to volunteers. They were making phone calls and they were getting ready to go out and knock doors. I get text messages almost every day from people I know on the ground in the different states telling me what they're hearing at the doors. And really great conversations too, just like I said yesterday, with some people who've been out canvassing. And they said what they were struck by is that people who are not the typical Republican voter are leaning towards supporting President Trump. And it's because of the number one issue for them is the economy. And when you talk about the economy to these voters, they may not have voted before, or maybe they voted differently in previous elections, but they know the economy was better for me under President Trump, so I'm going to get out and vote for him this time. So you're seeing a lot of shift on that one issue in particular. In the demographics and the traditional candidates, you say, okay, that's not going to be someone who votes for Republican. They're looking to vote Republican this time. And I couldn't agree with Harry more. GOTV, that's the world I come from. That is the name of the game right now. You have to not only get out the voters who you know will vote for you, but it's the people who you've ID'd that they would vote for you. You're aligned ideologically, but they just don't vote very often. So from the left, you're typically going to be more like the newly voters. In the Republican politics, you're looking at people who are like hunters. They have a hunting license, but they don't vote. Those are the people you're looking for.
Yeah. And Chuck, to that exact point, we saw Vice President Harris appearing on the hugely popular podcast Call Her Daddy today. It is one of the most listened to podcasts among women. It focused a lot on reproductive rights, her interview did. I can play a clip. Let's listen to it.
At a rally in Pennsylvania, former President Trump recently told women, "You will be protected and I will be your protector." What do you make of that?
So he who, when he was president, hand-selected 3 members of the United States Supreme Court with the intention that they would undo the protections of Roe v. Wade. And they did just as he intended. And there are now 20 states with Trump abortion bans, including bans that make no exception for rape or incest, which we just discussed, which means that you're telling a survivor of a crime, of a violation to their body, they don't have a right to make a decision about what happens to their body next, which is immoral. So this is the same guy that is now saying that. This is the same guy who said that women should be punished for having abortions. This is the same guy who uses the kind of language he does to describe women. So yeah, there you go.
And so, Chuck, as Katie was just saying, right now is about trying to find those people who you think would vote for you and motivating them to actually vote, as you were also saying too. And so, two things here. You see the vice president sitting down in kind of a non-traditional space. Years ago, we probably wouldn't see a presidential candidate. Podcast didn't exist, decades ago. But in this kind of more non-traditional space, not a political show, clearly trying to reach female voters that maybe haven't engaged here with an issue they think will work in their favor.
You know, I'm lucky enough where my firm is working on 26 House races and 3 Senate races. And I tell you that to say that across the country in all of these states, when it comes down to the very end, let me pull the curtain back and put y'all in the room of the strategist. It comes down at the presidential level on who you like and who you trust. Everybody who cares vehemently about an issue or one issue, pick your issue is the thing, they've made up their mind. There may be 1 or 2%. I think that's even a lie of folks that are undecided who really care about an issue.